Yesterday, I spoke about bookending this conference with the concept, the framework, the theological framework of friendship as being the ground within which we all work out post-trauma growth, healing, recovery and flourishing. Without friendship, it's impossible. That Western society and even Western Christianity has sold us the lie that salvation is an individual process. I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. If salvation is not for all, it's not for one. You cannot separate salvation as an individual from salvation of humanity and the earth, creation. So today's talk, if you've been about the trauma therapy industry for long enough, if you've become familiar with the marketing that bombards your social media and your computer from the moment you type the word trauma, and some of us even say from the moment you say the word trauma in your home, what's going on? You're bombarded. And fight, flight, and freeze, and fawn are the 4 F's of marketing trauma that you're sold. Now, while some of the world's leading experts are undoubtedly amongst the most compassionate, empathetic, and motivated by love and concern to bring healing and wholeness to those suffering trauma, it costs the earth to access their expertise in counselling or conferences. Trauma therapy is big business. Knowledge is healing, but knowledge is also power. Knowledge is a means of making money. And trauma healing centres and addiction centres charge hundreds of pounds a day to treat people. And if you're lucky enough to be a celebrity, then you can stay for as long as it takes. Your average person suffering trauma, the majority of people suffering trauma have no access to help of any kind. And we as a church should be informed, educated, sensitive to those with trauma. And yet so often we slap scriptures on them, we offer them trite solutions, spiritual disciplines, as we were talking about yesterday, which actually wound even further. Trauma is the root of most addiction. PTSD is probably the starting point for many suicides. Last year, St. Columba's Church paid £700 for me to attend the leading World Trauma Conference in Oxford. 4 days crammed with lectures and workshops by all the world's leading experts. I was triggered in the introductory talk, and I had to walk out of the conference. I watched or as many as I could, lectures online at home. If you need to walk out any stage, that is totally permissible, cool. Nobody will think anything different. This conference is an attempt to share the truth about post-trauma growth, healing, and flourishing with as little cost as possible. The annual Transgender, Intersex and Non-Binary Theology Conference runs at a massive loss every year, and it's only possible because of a tiny little church, St. Columba's, who employ me, subsidise the conference, employ Holly. And it's quite incredible that we're even here because of this tiny little church. The gospel salvation should never be a saleable commodity. Salve, healing, wholeness of body, mind, spirit, soul, family, community and nation. Salvation is a deliverance from all that binds, limits and oppresses us as individuals, as communities and as nations. So what would salvation, healing and deliverance from all that limits, binds and curses and oppresses the transgender community look like? What do the 4 gospel stories have to say about trauma? What does the Gospels have to say about the 4 F's of fight, flight, freeze and fawn? 10 years ago, I admitted that to myself and to God that I was transgender. And in the immediate aftermath of colossal personal breakdown, I cried solidly for almost 3 years. I was healing. Anything would cause tears to flow, but primarily it was the kindness of women. A kind word at the cash-out till in the supermarket would reduce me to tears that I couldn't stop. An affirming word in my ear as I negotiated the migration from masculinity to the sacred world of women would set me off. And it was often not words, but unspoken kindness expressed in solidarity, body language, but primarily in the very essence of womanhood. Women seemed to understand and know me better than I knew myself. Women reached out to me, invited me into an intimacy, a safety, and a healing space, place, and time. And I have a long list of women to thank for helping me heal. I can count on my hand the number of men who have helped me heal over the last 10 years. Stepping out as my true, authentic self felt like Bambi on ice, and at times like Bambi trying to escape the forest fire of a living hell. The realization was dawning on me that I had been brutalized and traumatized by patriarchal, toxic, fallen masculinity expressed in alpha male behaviors before I even entered the school playground. The false persona that I had subconsciously created, a mask, a suit of armor, an iron dome of ultra-competitive, insecure aggression and fear, had locked me into solitary confinement of a lifelong imprisonment in a masculine shell. My inner emotional spiritual world had become a frozen hellscape. I exchanged my soul for acceptance from the world of men. And the cause was the predatory and violent masculinity rooted in the need and desire to dominate and rule. I see it so clearly in a large part of the church, and it is ugly beyond words, cruel, condemning, and threatening of all, and condemning of all who threaten their hegemony. When women saw me stepping out as trans femme, they saw Bambi trying to escape the forest fire, and instinctively they sought at every step of my journey to protect me, stand with me, sit with me, hold my hand, assure and affirm me, often without words. What exuded from their very being was love, truth, understanding, grace, and mercy. I was learning a new language. Like the indigenous children of the Americas, that Christian missionary colonialism had violently sought to erase their language and culture by assimilation. Christianity had taught me that my innate, natural language flowing from my essentially feminine soul was not allowed. A feminine male was disordered, diseased, a depraved condition that any man should be deeply ashamed of. Weakness, vulnerability, sensitivity, and gentleness were despised in the language and world of men that I grew up in, and that I was forced to learn and adopt. A fallen world in the traditional Christian sense and understanding has created a world in which women have suffered millennia of oppression, violence and abuse by a patriarchal ordering of humanity. This is both an intensely personal experience for women from their earliest age and social awareness, suffering the predatory abuses of masculinity, and an institutional and structural violence against them, embedded at every level of society. An institutional and structural violence justified and condoned by patriarchal Christian theology and church practice. The result of this, women understandably have developed and speak a different language, a language necessary for their survival, protection, and flourishing. And this language is largely not understandable to so many men. It's an alien language. It's a language so deeply rooted in a woman's very being. It's a language that transcends words, communicates without speaking, and heals simply by virtue of being together in family and community. Now, this is not to say that female cultures and behaviours cannot be toxic. This is to focus on the incredible giftedness innate within the feminine being. And neither is it to say that all masculinity is patriarchal or toxic. Healthy, loving masculinity is a reflection of the eternal, divine and sacred too. Now, there's a fifth word, there's a fifth F in the world of trauma therapy. We know fight, flight, freeze and fawn, but does anybody know what the fifth F is in recognising trauma?
Is it befriend?
Very good. Unlike the other four Fs, befriend, it's an overwhelmingly positive. It's free, and once your eyes and consciousness have seen it, you cannot unsee it. It is an F that, as yet, I have heard no one in the trauma therapy world expound and freely share. Could that be because it is free and freely available to us all? If you're selling trauma therapy, you wouldn't tell people that it was freely available. At the beginning of this year, I watched a 2-minute video in which a beautiful woman gave voice to and articulated the world that I had walked into in my migration from disordered patriarchal existence of masculinity into a world of safety, healing and growth. And it's begun a healing and restoration of my soul from the lifelong trauma inflicted upon it by performative masculinity, performative Christianity and performative spirituality. Christianity, for the bulk of my 4.5 decades within it, has been first and foremost a religion of fear, judgment, exclusion and rejection, rooted and grounded in a dangerous theology of hell as the destiny of all those who do not believe. Could we watch the video, Tom?
Wanted to look at why women in most every society outlive men. And so they looked at fight or flight or freeze. But women have another hormone that shows up that isn't that. It's actually a hormone that is about caring.
Tend and befriend.
Tend and befriend. So you have this intervening thing. And what women will do when there's a crisis or something traumatic, call Deborah, call Cynthia, get Kenesha, we gonna all get together, right? And what these women started to do, now, unlike men, if I were to say to my husband, I love him to death, I go, listen, he's struggling with something, you wanna call your brother? Or, no, I got this, I'm going in the cave, I'm gonna pull the shade, right. Well, here's what they've learned about women. The more women gather, the larger the number and frequency, the longer you will live. It literally is connected to life longevity. So men go in the cave, in the dark, and die. I keep telling them, come up out of there. Get your friends. Mm-hmm. Talk to somebody, right? Mm-hmm. There's absolutely no reason why that can't change.
Bulb. It was an explosion. I can't describe what it did to me. Friending and tending describes the deepest longing and calling within my body, soul and spirit. It describes all I am and all I ever long to be. It is the essence of the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. But patriarchy has all but obliterated this reflection and image of God within patriarchal-driven masculinity. I watched this video and wept with joy. I knew I had finally come home. That this being is the deepest root of who I am. It is the deep essence of all the women I know, love and respect. There is a small number of men, and I include within this, who live this eternal truth in their being. Discipleship is the single greatest paradigm that has shaped and set the course of my life since encountering Jesus 44 years ago. The Gospels have shaped the course of my life, but had failed to change the essence of my being. When I saw this video, the most crucial part, the most important missing piece of my jigsaw has fallen into place. Now, the first place I go to check any new fad, theory, fashion is the Gospels. I can't help it. It's instinctive. It's like, is this for real or is this bullshit? So let's have a look at this woman's theory of friending and trending and see if it is confirmed or disproved in the Gospel stories. Okay, what's the most dramatic event in the Gospels? It's not rocket science, is it? It only takes a rudimentary knowledge of the crucifixion story to realise that we are watching this woman's description of friending and tending being played out in real time. From Jesus' arrest and Peter's testosterone-laden intervention, to the courtyard and Peter's denial, to the crucifixion itself, we watch the men's responses to trauma, testosterone-laden conflict, fight, flight, fear and freeze, even fawn. The women remain present, friending and tending in the very face of horrific trauma. Jesus, even in the agony of his own trauma, reaches out to both John and his mother, friending and tending to their needs. Unbelievable. If I was hanging on that cross, I would be spitting with rage. I would be cursing those who had driven in the nails. I believe the women took Jesus' body with Joseph of Arimathea, and that would have been Mary, mother of Jesus, Mary of Bethany, Mary Magdalene, and I believe they would have led in the washing, cleansing and embalming of Jesus' body, the ultimate act of being present in the face of trauma. Being embodied and incarnating love, present in the face of horrific trauma, not disassociating or running away from trauma, but walking into it and doing what needs to be done. The temptation to flee from trauma, to disassociate both mentally and physically, fulfills the dysfunctional, unregulated panic of fear. Mary Magdalene remains at the tomb, returns to the tomb, present, embodied, incarnate. She's trying to reconcile and work through her trauma in the last place that she was with Jesus. John and Jesus both demonstrate non-typical male responses, very different from patriarchal models of masculinity. So yes, I'd say that we see women friending and tending through intense trauma here in the heart of the gospel story, and we can learn much from them. So, friending and tending, befriending, is actually a psychological phenomenon which is recognized in psychological studies. And it's way more complex than being primarily a female trauma response, or even having estrogen or testosterone as drivers and motivators. But neither can its predominance in women or the effects of estrogen and testosterone be ruled out as inconsequential. For me, this has been an incredible awakening, a realization. It validates me, it validates my embodiment and incarnation of who I am and all that I express, and who I am more longing to become more fully. I knew as a child that friending and tending was my natural disposition, a predominant character trait, and friending and tending was all I ever wanted to do. And from my earliest age and memories, all I ever wanted to be was a nurse. Community and society brutalized me into becoming a stereotypical, fear-laden, toxic male. Shame, fight, flight, freeze and fawn, my only responses to trauma. In trauma, I isolated and was emotionally, mentally, and relationally paralyzed. I developed lifelong suicidal ideation in response to continual trauma, and it's miraculous that I'm still alive. As soon as I came out as trans femme, my frozen, buried emotions unlocked, and I immediately began to revert to my primary character trait of friending and tending. Friending and tending is what I do, and it is who I am. But it at times has been severely undermined by my lifelong addiction to elite sport, producing incredible levels of testosterone. And testosterone is a very powerful motivator and inhibitor. I also realized as I began to study this female-led phenomenon of friending and tending that it is the heart of the pastoral gifting of and to the church. Wherever males dominate church leadership, the pastoral care within the church becomes restricted and inhibited by all the male dominant traits. Studies in testosterone and its effects and its impact upon male behaviours would suggest that the primary characteristics of testosterone and high levels of testosterone are not violence and aggression per se, but dominance. In short, in my own life, I have been living a yin and yang balance of friending and tending desire, conflicting with a lifelong learnt pattern of male behavioural issues resulting from excessive testosterone production, which seem to escalate fight, flight, freeze syndrome. I have found fawning, by comparison, a relatively easy to deal with and unlearn pattern of relationship and behaviour. So embracing the 5th F of trauma response, friending and tending, as one of which is far more potential to bring post-trauma growth, healing and flourishing, has been one of the happiest and biggest discoveries of my life. And I just want to keep stepping into it. That tiny 2-minute video unlocked me. It gave me permission to be who I am. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. It seems so blindingly obvious, and I've overlooked it all my life, in myself and in others. And it was the women who befriended me as I began my journey into womanhood of being trans femme. It was these women who created safe space for me, listened to me unconditionally, and gave me unconditional love. Now looking back, I realised that all they were doing, and all they have ever done, was friending and tending. This gift is not so much about doing. This gift is rooted in your being. It is the essence of who you are. It's the essential quality within us. And it perhaps reflects the essence of God's being, of the divine and eternal gift of healing to the earth, to humanity. It is the heart and energy of love that fuels the divine dance and the sacred romance I spoke about yesterday, which is at the heart of Trinitarian theology, and at the heart of humanity's desire and longing for intimacy and the need to belong, friendship. Just sitting with, just being with the women who have loved me into being who I am, being in their presence has restored my soul. Coming away each time from these women, I knew that I was healing and becoming more whole, recovering from decades of trauma, denial, isolation, and a frozen inner desolation. We talk of Mother Earth and how being connected to the earth is so deeply restorative. Connecting with the feminine has been equally restorative for me. Moving beyond the slavery of binaries to allow self-discovery allows us to embrace this gift of friending and tending, which so many men find so difficult to do, other than by virtue of their status and achievements and their place in the pecking order of the patriarchal pyramid. My sister was one of the first to embrace me as my true self. Helen Murphy was a senior pastor at Trent Vineyard. She showed me incredible love by just being willing to be with me. Emily Garces, friend and author. Bibi O'Shea. Cyril Diouf. Brianna Bone, my wife. My wife is perhaps the most beautiful person expressing this divine gift of friending and tending. Our own marriage had become frozen by my own being trapped within the endless cycles of Masculinity, testosterone-dominated trauma response, fight, flight and freeze. Trauma dominated our marriage, but we were blind to it. We could not see its hidden and destructive powers. To survive, Pam had to reflect my own traits and characteristics, or perhaps be crushed by them. If she were to show weakness, she loved our children, but her love could not reach me because I was frozen and imprisoned within fight, flight and freeze syndromes. They perpetuated my addiction to sport as an escape from a reality too painful to contemplate. So friending and tending does the exact opposite of what fight, flight and freeze and fawn does, because it's a gift rooted in being, in physicality, in being embodied, present, incarnate, just being there for the other. To be present for someone, we give our most basic gift, time. And time is life. Without time, we have no life. To give another time is to give life and our life to another. Not because we must, but because we choose in love to do so. Today, in this monetarized world and life, time is money and money is time. Choosing to give ourselves to another, simply to be with them, with no agenda, is the ultimate act of friending and tending. The real power of friending and tending is in the non-verbal, the body language, our presence as healers. It's in the meal that we offer, share. It's in the washing of feet. It's in the tenderness and the listening. The temptation to fix often destroys our ability to bring healing at a far deeper non-verbal level. The Church's dependency upon psychological therapy and prayer as the primary means of trying to facilitate healing for others or bolster our own role as fixer-healers, as often as not can re-traumatize. And I'm guilty of this still, and I'm desperately trying to unlearn the reliance upon having to try and understand and fix everything and everyone. When your eyes open to the healing gift of friending and tending, you begin to see what Jesus was doing. So much of Jesus' life was just about being with people, shooting the breeze, fishing, mending tables, mending boats, fishing nets, going for walks, sharing meals, just hanging out. Presence and physicality, washing the feet of the weary, dirty pilgrims. Touch, a gift beyond words that so scandalized the religious. Friending and tending is boundless hospitality. Friending and tending is listening even beyond words. Friending and tending is just being there for someone. Friending and tending is not about providing answers, it's about providing friendship. Friending and tending creates a safe space, time and place, only when you are with a safe person. Friending and tending is healing and restorative, and it flows from your being, not from your doing. Friending and tending flows from who you are. It is the byproduct of who you are. When we get this, when we finally believe we are who we were called to be, who we really are, we can let go of all our vain notions of being fixers and saviors and healers. So much of Christian ministry is caught up in our Saviour and Messiah complexes, our own needs for validation. What propels so many into Christian ministry is the need to be validated. When we let go of this, we become content just to be with people. No agenda, knowing that our greatest gift is just to give someone our time and to be with them. And I think Jesus presents a very non-typical male embodiment and incarnation of friending and tending. I think much of his teaching has been mistranslated, misunderstood and misapplied to help create an industry and a religion that bears little resemblance to who he is or was. So this session is less about providing you with answers to life and trauma's problems. It's inviting you into a discovery, a process of discovery. That your whole being is the richest gift you can offer another. That from your being, from your physical presence, healing can flow. That healing best flows when you have given up all thoughts of fixing and healing others and realize that your presence may be all that they desire. Your presence alone validates and heals. This is the journey of being those who bring post-trauma growth, healing and flourishing to others. It's rooted and grounded in our becoming courageous and, dare I say, comfortable enough in facing and processing our own traumas. This for me is summarized in the death and the long Holy Saturday before resurrection life for Christ and his followers. Holy Saturday is where I process my trauma, and for me it is a place where I acknowledge the void within, the total loss of God, until I am content to sit in this wasteland. I will be forever trying to fix and heal other people, rather than being content to be with them in their own void, in their own total absence of peace, in the wastelands of their own trauma. Now, the anger that Tina so beautifully and vulnerably described to us yesterday is often given up and laid down, surrendered and let go of in our own personal Calvaries. The never-ending death of our ego as we face the void within, as we embrace and make peace with our shadow, as we experience the long dark night of the soul that is Easter Saturday, the wasteland between death and resurrection. Sometimes there are no words that you can offer somebody. All they long for is your presence. Sometimes all someone needs is for you to be with them, to be present, and to acknowledge the hell that they are living through. Sometimes washing feet is all we can do for people, and it's the best thing we can do for people. It signals to them our posture before them. We have come to love, to serve, to listen, simply to be with them. And washing feet is fundamentally about being present for someone. It is offering unconditional friendship. It's listening without judgment. It is to friend and to tend. When we get this, we can begin to access the non-verbal, somatic and therapeutic gifts that minister best to the traumatized bodies of other people. The body keeps the score. Trauma gets trapped within us until we've dealt with it. And we carry it in our bodies, and it affects our bodies. Traumatized people and bodies do not need to understand as much as they need to be loved. Understanding often follows on behind. It is in the physical realm that the restoration of bodies to peace, calm and post-trauma growth occurs. And our theologies undergird and create the basis from which we live, and our best theology is grounded in our being. I think Tina quoted Paul Tillich yesterday, theologian. God is the ground of our being, whatever you consider God to be. For Christians, that's one thing. But many people understand God in different ways, and as far as I'm concerned, that's cool. So friending and tending flows from our being rather than our doing, and it's the greatest gift we can give to those suffering trauma. It emanates from our bodies. When you realize who you are, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. You reflect the divine, and the divine dwells within you. And when you let go of all your striving and learn to simply be with hurting people, knowing that you are all they need, we call it incarnating Christ. A couple of years ago, our neighbour's dog escaped their gated garden. Now, these two dogs are rescue dogs, Spanish Pedengos, and they are clearly traumatized dogs. They have been attacked by other dogs, big time. And one has clearly suffered such serious attack that when they see other dogs, they go crazy. My wife had just stepped out our back gate with our little mutt. The two dogs attacked our tiny dog, and it was a vicious attack. Blood, stitches, severe trauma. Because our dog was between my wife and them, she has clearly understood that they were attacking Pam as well. Since then, since that trauma, she has become Pam's self-appointed guardian. She's only this big. When I am not home, bless them, Bella is hyper-stressed and trauma is obvious in her behaviours. And it's made things difficult for Pam and our neighbours until we can find healing to the trauma that Bella carries in her body. She remains stressed. Now, here's the thing. As soon as I come home, as soon as I am physically, emotionally present, Bella calms, is peaceful. And I tell you, within minutes, she is laid out on the sofa, chilling. My presence emanates peace to her, and she becomes peaceful. Any encounter with an aggressive dog raises all Bella's trauma again and again and again, and it's not pretty. Now, the difference between Bella as a dog living with trauma and you is that Bella is unable to apply logical reasoning to her situation. We learn, we understand, we grow, we change, we heal. When your physical presence in someone's life is God's physical presence in their life, we celebrate with those who celebrate, we dance with those who dance, we sing with those who sing, and we mourn with those who mourn, and we weep with those who weep. And our presence is enough. Your presence is enough. We are wounded healers only when we believe and accept that we are wounded healers. You either disassociate or you embody and incarnate love by remaining present in the face and threat of trauma. That's me. I'm empty. So, questions. Do you have any questions? If you have questions online, do type them out.
Let's go first working. So somebody online was wondering who the woman in the video was, Chrissie.
I think the names on the video, we'll have to find it out and put that online. I've not been able to find it, but I think it is actually on the video or an attachment. Thank you.
Any questions in the room?
Self-explanatory, isn't it?
I guess obviously, thank you. That was a wonderful talk. For those who still either have transitioned, obviously you went in the direction of from a masculine coded environment to a feminine coded environment. For trans people who move from them into a masculine direction, or alternatively those who just haven't known who on earth they are, how do they, I mean, I guess we see it a bit in the Gospels in the sense that John and Jesus, as you say, exhibit these. How do we in practical ways begin to move towards this tending and befriending within spaces that are really societally against?
You know, in this context, I knew this was going to be the first question with a bunch of trans men in the room. And as I say, it's not as simple as estrogen, testosterone. It's not as simple as being male, female. And yet, the feminine species is the predominant providers. I know hundreds of men and I know hundreds of women, and I can count on, maybe my fingers and toes, the number of men who stand out in their ability to friend and tend. And it's generally because it's a societal, cultural, is it spiritual, but it's a bondage. It's a bondage to slavery, to fear. Darwin's theories of evolution were rooted in misogyny. The whole concept of the alpha male is fallacy, and yet it's visible in humanity. From the playground onwards, you see boys wrestling and striving for dominance. And this is not to say that girls and women, girls at school could be, they're equals. But I think in the maturity of womanhood and femininity, these traits just blossom, they flourish, they grow in a way that I don't see within patriarchal masculinity. So I do think that Jesus and John and some of the men that we see around us, and I think particularly trans men, are supremely gifted in tending and friending. You have, it's not an attack on masculinity, it's an attack on patriarchy, if you like. I'm seeking to tear down patriarchal dominance. It's not anti-masculinity. No way. The guy I was describing yesterday, who spent 20 years teaching the world's toughest soldiers, the parachute regiment, the SAS, the SBS. These are what he would call grade 1 testosterone-laden alpha males. And yet he's one of the most gifted pastors I have ever met, and he's not a Christian. And what shines is his ability to friend and tend. His authority as a soldier over other soldiers wasn't in his rank, wasn't in his position, his title, his hierarchy. It was in his ability to motivate his men through friending and tending, through being empathetic. And they knew that. They would follow him out of plane. They would do anything for him because he would do anything for them. I hope that's some kind of answer. Thank you. So.
I was thinking about this whole idea of separating the idea of masculinity and patriarchal systems. And this isn't going to be a very well organised question, sorry.
It's fine.
I feel like maybe not enough.
You're like me.
How do we, any ideas, and I'll also be afterwards if anybody else has any ideas on this. How do we navigate this this tendency that we have in society, or in in some feminist spaces, also in some queer spaces, as well as in more conservative spaces, if this idea that, not actually in conservative spaces, but in this idea that I often come across this idea of this conflation of masculinity and patriarchy that you've just separated. How do we practically sort of challenge this idea? For example, an idea that I've heard from cis women as a non-binary person, a trail of femininity, a trail of womanhood, or the idea that we have sometimes in some lesbian communities that trans masc people again is sort of the trail of the community, which then comes through people from transitioning and so on. And then this idea sort of counterbalanced with that is that sometimes you end up with sort of in trans masc spaces, sometimes we have a sort of you have to become misogynistic because that's how you be a man. And how do we practically, so you've expressed this separation of masculinity and patriarchy, but how do we practically challenge that in our when we come across it?
Okay,
Find that very well.
so my whole being is heart-led rather than understanding-led. All my life I've been in survival mode, so my instincts drive my everything. So I do things instinctively through feelings, through my heart processing, and it takes me years sometimes for my understanding of my brain to catch up. So that's a very easy way for me to say it. I haven't got a clue. But what I would say is I think you have to separate friending and tending from being either primary masculine or feminine. That you have to see it as a gift to humanity. But I think the feminine, that womanhood, more intrinsically is able to preserve, lay hold of, keep, flourish this gift. Whereas the fallenness of humanity, which we see in war, in dominance, in hierarchy, in the deepest institutions of humanity's organisation, are entrenched, in the evolution of civilization from primitive and ancient into ordered and civilized, supposedly civilized, structured, is the evolution of hierarchy. And the evolution of hierarchy has always streamed through power and violence and dominance and war. The sword is the single greatest tool of patriarchy, and the word for phallus is, phallus, penis, same word. Hierarchy is a primitive tool of managing and organising society. And I thank God that the URC isn't led by hierarchy. I've been in hierarchical church for 40 years and I've only just escaped it. And I've always argued, I'm deeply nonconformist and have been instinctively, perhaps because of family, from day one. And I've always argued that the church doesn't need to be governed by hierarchy. And they have shot me down again and again and again. Even my closest friends within church have said, you're crazy. You have to have hierarchy. I'm saying, no, you don't. It's perfectly possible to run a church without hierarchy. And then lo and behold, I fall into the URC and I see this perfect demonstration of how you run church without hierarchy. It's not perfect, but it's perfect in that it refuses to use the tools of hierarchy to govern a church. The governance of the URC is from the church members. It is the total opposite of hierarchy. So I think they're concepts, but they're so deeply embedded in society, we don't know how to begin undoing them. Capitalism is hierarchy. Consumerism is hierarchy. It's all about power, money. It's a big question.
Thanks for trying to.
What time for one more? Yeah. Well, run over. That's good. No, and if there's Tina, yeah.
Thank you. So I was thinking about when I had left-handed male colleagues and how the communication was really good, the sort of collaboration. And at the time, I read that actually left-handed males, it was the right side of the brain. So it was just the thing about you were focusing on hormones, but is there something neurological? And then while I was waiting to ask that question, then I thought, what do you think of Jung's theory, which we all have the masculine and the feminine within us anyway, and the master work is to unite the two. That's everybody's journey.
Yeah, I mean, the deepest level, spiritually and theologically, we are seeking to end the biblical war between the sexes, which is described in the fall, both within ourselves but within society. So yeah, I think you're right. But I think just what you prompt in me talking about the left-handed male is why do men? Why is a handshake with the right hand? Not a rhetorical question. Why is the handshake always with the right hand? Okay, the reason handshake, the handshake is a symbol of making peace, of having putting one's sword away and offering even your enemy your hand in peace. The handshake signifies making peace because the hand has put down the sword, the hand has put down the phallus. They've stopped willy-waggling. So there's far more to it. It's embedded in our culture, it's embedded within our psyche. And left-handed males, gay males, left-handed people, look at the hell we've inflicted on them. So thank you, everybody. This is just the beginning, I hope, for many people of realizing who you are and all that you're called to be. It's innate within all of us. It's not masculine or feminine. This gift is humanity's. It's the church's. It's ours as trans people. And maybe we're able to do this better than many because we've already begun the process of reconciliation. Thank you all.